You cannot escape the truth. You cannot escape the indivisible unity of life as it is, before description, beyond description. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be debated with. Only the mind can debate another mind, but the essential knowing nature cannot be disputed. And the moment we discover this, and we strengthen our ability to be transparent to that, to recognize that, to know this, to become convinced of it, we may not always have it in the forefronts of our minds, but once we do have it in the forefronts of our minds, in periods of contemplation and inquiry and meditation, or spontaneous recognition, then that every time that happens, something changes in the organism. There is a rewiring, there is a transparency, there's a purification that happens. And the purer you become, the more natural and automatic your recognition of the indivisible power that is manifesting itself as you is present. So to increase your happiness in this context, from this vantage point, means to, through moments of deliberate recognition, like I say, often 2 to 5 seconds, repeat it many times, and some daily meditations for a bit of a longer sitting, so you can practice concentrating on subtle recognitions. Because another word for purification is subtlification, and that's probably not a word either, but I like that word quite a bit. It's the ability to become subtler in our reasoning, subtler in our ability to know, and our ability to perceive and recognize. And it also, to me, equates with our IQ, or not in a typical sense, but our intelligence. The subtler we become, the more intelligent, the more wise, the more balanced we become. Those that we perhaps sometimes in a fun moment describe as idiots, if you look at the nature of their thinking, it's very, you could say, gross. Not in terms, well, maybe also like gross, but gross in terms of like, it's just very rough. It's just very basic. It's very, there's no subtlety in their observation, their ability to observe. Closer to the caveman evolution of life in the form of the human being than it is to the perhaps ET-ish version of us, the more ethereal, the more intelligent, balanced, loving, vibrant, self-aware version of the evolution known as human being. So the subtler you are, the more you know without the solidity of knowledge, without the solidity of attachment per se. The subtler you become, the less you're able to tie yourself to any particular observation. So there's a flexibility, there's an emptiness that becomes more and more apparent to itself, to the degree where it really begins to transcend conventional reality. It includes and incorporates conventional reality, but you can imagine maybe if you go super subtle, like the subtlest you can imagine right now, the purest you can imagine right now, imagine being 1,000 times as clarified, as purified, as emptied out of knowledge, of assumptions, without losing the ability to know or be aware or exist. Imagine yourself 1,000 times more purified than you presently can feel yourself to be. If you're doing this right, you will not know what it's like, but you can have a sense of the fact that you don't know what it's like. And you can download a sense of how transcendent it would appear to your current sense of self. How sort of ingraspable and perhaps weird or ungrounded it would seem. But therefore from this vantage point, this is the practice, is to become subtler and subtler, subtler, so that your consciousness becomes more and more like pure space. So that the chitta, or the heart, or the essence of mind, the heart of a being, the heart essence, the mind essence of a being, becomes pure and pure, more and more like space, where all the assumptions which operate like objects in the back of your mind are more and more observed and removed or deconstructed or dissolved or seen through over and over again. If you imagine doing this for another 10,000 years with daily effort, what would your experience be? And it's like the less we assume, the more we see, the more we understand directly. Like we don't really need time. True knowledge or true perception of things, true comprehension, even of relative phenomena, comes spontaneously and directly from the state of emptiness and purity. Whatever needs to be known is spontaneously known. But the requirement for this is a process of inquiry that is earnest, that is sincere, that goes to the very core of our assumption of self and beyond. The subtler we become, the more we understand, without the need for conceptual or constructed knowledge. We assume subject-object. It's another assumption. There is no evidence for subject-object to actually be a thing. I'm not saying we cannot have the feeling of it and that we cannot have the sort of experience of subject-object. But if you bring the sort of direct perception, call it mindfulness if you will, but take it deeper than just being aware of the glass on the table. It's about slicing through all your mental assumptions and perceiving the moment of presence itself, this moment of presence, of existing, of I am itself. And for that moment, rejecting any attributes, any additions to that essential knowing nature of I am. If you continue to ignore and reject the attributes that pop up in awareness, the more clear you become, the more self-aware, more self-realized you become in the nature, the original purity nature of the citta or self. Just by having these 5 seconds of emptiness repeated throughout the day where you radically pause, you bring full awareness, full mindfulness to this moment, and you let that moment be as it is, and you get acquainted with the direct perception of pure awareness, recognizing its own self, without assuming any attributes. And the more you do this, the more you will find layers of attributes and assumptions that you never even knew existed. Like you're assuming, you don't know it consciously, but in the back of your mind, you feel like you're on a planet right now. Just one simple example. You think there is gravity. Just a simple example. These are things we assume. We don't know them consciously because that would be very unproductive to have all these things there in the background. But the more you get behind those perceptions consciously and dissolve them, what remains is the nature of reality rather than subject-object reference-based self. So it's a pretty trippy journey at a certain level of perception because it begins to deconstruct your very reality, your very, not just your relational reality within your assumption of reality, of the subject and object, but the very nature of the subject-object assumption itself. The container for your everyday life itself becomes empty. And in a sense, you could say unreal. Doesn't mean we go to the extreme of not appreciating conventional reality, because conventional reality, the dream, the experience of subject-object, continues to appear. But the feeling of subject-object being real can be observed and therefore can be deconstructed. And what remains is the observer itself, which is not the brain. The brain can be observed, can be known. The assumption of the brain can be known. What remains is us. Every time, over and over again, when you deconstruct something, what shines forth ever brighter is the indescribable purity of the essential nature of being.